So welcome again, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. This is the fourth and final webinar in our May webinar series of the Conservation Pro Toolkit. Joined again by Terry Williams, trainer extraordinaire for all things conservation planning. And today we are going to talk about Project Ready, the tracking, permitting, and completing conservation plans. Quick reminder, we're in meeting mode, so you all have your own camera and mute control. So please just keep yourselves on mute unless you're actively speaking. I think you can put your questions in the chat at any time, and we can try and get those as they come along. And then we'll also have a Q&A at the end. And at the end, they're welcome to unmute, cameras off, and just have, discussion and questions there. So thanks again for being here, and I'm just going to turn it right over to Terry to get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Jan. Yeah, and I did actually figure out how to see the chat and see your pictures at the same time as I'm showing the presentation. So that will be good. I can see if there are questions that pop up, which hasn't been something I could do before. So we learn something new every day in this field, and that's one of the joys of working in excuse me, in the conservation district world, is that we get to learn something new all the time. So today we're going to talk about excuse me. Today we're going to talk about how to get projects ready. So we talk a lot about conservation planning, and then you kind of dive off the deep end and you don't really know what to do next. So that's what we're going to talk about now. What do you do now? Now what do we do now after we have created a plan? So I am your instructor. My name is Terry Williams. I worked for the Okanagan Conservation District from 2012 through 2017. Worked through several very bad fire seasons and was the wildfire project coordinator during that time. And then I also worked with some NRCS folks in helping put on some of the conservation planning training for NRCS during that time. And now I am back teaching some classes on how to be a conservation planner. So in this stage, in the 9 steps framework of planning, there's step 8, which is implement the project, and step 9, which is evaluate. And I actually add reiterate. So you're evaluating something, you're seeing if it's working, and then if it is not working, or if you've got some other things that you need to work on, you go back and start over with your steps again, right? So this part, this project ready part, is in these 2 steps, step 8 and step 9. And what we're going to talk about is preparing for implementation, and then funding projects, and then implementing the projects, and then the wrap up. And so this is going to give you a little bit more detail about those parts of the process of getting a conservation plan on the ground and implementing all the things that you've spent so much time planning for. I'm going to start with planning implementation details. So what details do we need to think about? So if you've got a plan, you kind of know what's going on the site. You've done your assessments. You've created a set of resource concerns that you're wanting to do something about. And then you're applying some practice standards to those to address them, to make them better, right? So it's really kind of important that you understand and know your practice standards inside and out. So I would really recommend that you go into the ePhotog, the electronic field office technical guide, which is online. I will have a handout for you guys that's the class outline, and there will be links to some of these things that I'm talking about. You want to get really familiar with your practice standards and know what the requirements are. So it'll give you actually like specifications for specific practices and how they need to be built and what the most effective way of using them is. And so it'd be really good for you to have a good understanding of at least the common practice standards for the kinds of work that you're doing. So if you're a dairy planner, you're going to have a certain set of practices that people in your field are going to be very familiar with and do all the time. Use that list. There are a lot of practices and they're very wide ranging. And so you may not need all of them, but I would recommend that you go find some other folks in your specialty and find out which practices are really common with them and know those practice standards backwards, forwards, and upside down. And then you're also going to be thinking about the conservation physical effects. What will happen to the various resources when we do this thing? When we act in a plan, in a property, on the ground with the natural resources, no matter what you do, you're going to be affecting them somehow. So the conservation physical effects is kind of a set of, I would say, prognostications about what is likely to happen to the other resources and the one that you're targeting as you do these practices, right? As you do them, this is how it's going to be changing. So getting to know the conservation physical effects, there's some tools that we'll talk about and a couple that I've put in the class outline that will help you to discover what those are and maybe think about them more. We also want to think about how the practices are going to work together to address the resource concerns. So maybe we have several practices that kind of come in a bundle. When I was doing livestock water troughs, there's the watering facility, there's the heavy use protection that goes around the trough, there's pipelines that bring water to there. There's all these different pieces that kind of work together. And oftentimes even practices that are not commonly together will impact each other in the same way that the actual effects of them do, but the actual practices themselves will work together. So you want to kind of understand about kind of puzzle piecing the pieces together into this bigger picture of how you're going to address that resource concern. And you want to be able to describe that. You want to be able to talk about it. You want to be able to justify it to other people. So you also want to think about at this point, the specific applications or the methods or the tools or the equipment or the specifics about your project. So you say watering facility, that's great. What type of trough are we talking about? How much is it going to cost? What are the specifics about that? How deep do you have to dig the hole? There's lots of different pieces of this that you kind of need to think about when you're going from this conceptual idea to actual putting things on the ground. And then we're also going to talk about how this particular project addresses long-range planning considerations. Maybe you've got some, maybe like we just did at Okanagan Conservation District, a community wildfire protection plan. And that was a huge document that has all kinds of actions that the county would like to take. Many of those are not going to have anything to do with the conservation district, but some of them do. And so maybe you have a goal in that long-range planning document of having certain things happen. How is this project going to fit into those long-range planning documents? And how are they going to impact that end result that the long-range plans are looking to improve? So the second thing I would recommend that you do is write. Now, I know some people don't like to write. This is something that maybe you're a little scared about, but actually I'm going to give you some tips about this. So here's what I think you should write at this point. You've got your plan together. You've written some stuff for the plan, but that's really notes for yourself and for your cooperator. But now I want you to kind of think about writing to a different audience. Who are the funders? Who are the people who are going to have to approve the project? Who are the partners? Who is the public? Maybe you're talking about something that you want to really highlight this project in your CD advertising or your outreach. So you want to do several little pieces, okay? One is an elevator speech. It's like a two-sentence description of what you're doing. If you can't distill your plan down to a two-sentence thing that says this is what we're going to do and this is why we're doing it, it's probably not a good project. You probably should rethink or just get better at elevator speeches. But you just want to be able to say to somebody in a conversation, I'm doing this thing and this is why we're doing it. You want to make sure that there's a clear justification for the actions that you're taking. Then I would do 2 project summaries. And one right away, I would do a short 1-paragraph version of the elevator speech with a little more detail in it. And then the long project summaries, you might wait until you need these things so you know what format they need to be in. But I would actually maybe write something maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs long and put in even more detail about it. You're going to need that information for your board review of the project and any funding applications that you're doing. You're definitely going to need that. But it's actually just a really good idea to do this writing anyway, even if you don't need to write it down for some reason. This process of writing actually helps you kind of see the project from another perspective, helps you understand how other people might look at it. You, as the planner, have been deeply involved in it, so you kind of know the ins and outs and the justifications, but someone else looking in may not understand anything about it. And so it's a good practice to kind of write something to an audience that doesn't understand what you're doing and try to anticipate any objections, describe the project to them, and that kind of thing. So again, you're going to want to anticipate any objections that people might have, and then have other people review what you've written and see what their response is. If they don't understand something, you can clarify. If they have an objection that you haven't thought of, you can include the answer of it into your writing. Sorry, our internet's a little bit slow this morning, so when I click, nothing's happening. I hope you can hear me okay. So the next step after doing that writing and kind of clarifying and summarizing your plan is to prepare some specific budgets and timelines. And I would give yourself some good time to do this. Budgets and timelines are actually a little bit they're sort of like thinking through the project in advance. If you were going to actually do the project, what steps are you going to take to do it? And it takes a little while to think about that. You know, you might say, hey, I want this watering trough, but you don't know where you're going to buy it. You don't know what the possible equipment is. So you need some time to think through those details. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a minute of some spreadsheets that I've actually created for my own projects, and I'm going to send you samples of these. And there are plenty of different templates you can use. You may have someone in your office who has a better one for your particular stuff. You may want to create one, but just different ways to track the budgeting and the timelines. Also, if you're doing multiple projects of the same kind, when I was working on the wildfire recovery stuff, I had a list of cooperators that all had the same kinds of projects, mostly fence replacements after the big wildfires. And I had multiple people in a spreadsheet, and not all of their, but the summary of their costs, their projected costs, the budgets for their projects all in one. I'll show you an example of that in a minute as well. So as you're doing this, you want to keep really good communication with your cooperators, because they are the ones that are going to have to do the thing. We are not 99% of the time implementing things as a conservation district. Our cooperators are doing that. So you want to make sure that anything that you have decided on, you've decided on together, and that it works for the cooperator. Okay, don't be making decisions and then your cooperator go, I can't install that. I don't have XYZ piece of equipment, right? So you want to make sure that you're keeping in touch with your cooperators and making sure that these budgets and timelines reflect things that they are agreeing to. And then you want to think through, like I say, your implementation steps one at a time. We're going to do this, then that's going to require these things. I'm going to do this, and that's going to require these things. You're thinking through your steps and your materials. And then contact suppliers. Maybe you don't know how much stuff is going for. I would contact your local suppliers for individual item costs, and you're going to itemize them in the budget. Okay, so each piece and how much its costs is going to be in that overall budget spreadsheet. And I would encourage you not to underestimate. Don't take the lowest. Like if you call several suppliers and you get several different costs, I would never choose the lowest one, not because you might not use the lowest one, but because you want to have a little contingency worked into your budget. You want a little bit of extra worked into your budget in case prices go up. Well, between the time you create all this paperwork and then you go to implement and pipe has gone up for, you know, $1 a foot or something. You don't want to be caught with not enough money as at the end. Sorry, my mouth is also not working today, apparently. Okay, so I'm going to show you this. This is my planned practices summary. This is an actual project. I've taken the names out. But so I have up here in the corner, the planned practices summary. I would put the cooperator's name in here and then the date that I created it, my name and the conservation district. I would put the practice numbers in there. This will come in very handy when you go to enter things into funding requests, websites and such. The practice names, the estimated lifespan. This is also in the ePhotog. How long is that thing supposed to last? That's a good thing to have in your back pocket. And then you're going to estimate out how much each of these things is going to cost you. So say I'm digging a well, I'm going to hire somebody to do that. It's going to cost $12,200. They've given me an estimate. I calculate out how much that's going to cost. And then I'm definitely going to add tax. Don't forget your tax. Okay. That will throw you off. There are hundreds of dollars in tax on some of these bigger projects, so don't forget to put tax in there. Okay, so then we need a pump, and we're gonna put in a pump. It's going to cost this much. We only need one, so it's going to cost that much total, and then the tax on top of it. Labor, maybe the person themselves is going to put that in, so we don't need to charge tax. What we're doing is assigning them a rate. This was the rate. It may have changed since then. This is the contributed services rate from 2013 when I did this spreadsheet. So it's probably more than that now. But your labor rate and then how many hours. So we got 4 hours. We're multiplying times 20 and we're getting $80 total. And then each of these practices, we're going to work the same way. Each step, each little item is going to go into that total, right? And then we have to think about the other side of this. So there's things that apply to the project itself, and then there's associated time and labor that has to happen to make the project work on the conservation district side. So these little colored columns here are ways to calculate out how much time and cost it's going to take to actually keep the conservation district running on these projects. So TA hours, it's going to cost 20, it's going to take 20 hours for that planner to help the person with that plan and to continue through implementation, all the checks, all the site visits. My rate at that time was $30 an hour. I'm going to multiply those together. I don't know what I meant by resources. Something else. I can't remember, but basically we're just talking about the layout of the table. So then the district manager is going to do some hours. They may not do very many, but they charge a bigger rate. So they may get paid pretty good for that, you know, few hours that they work on that particular project. Your admin team is going to have time in there. You're going to charge overhead to keep the lights on. You're going to have travel miles and how many trips you're going to make. And then you're going to have a total of that particular item, okay, for each of these different practices. Now, I believe that this one actually had several, 2 different sites. So there was a Paradise Hill site and there was a Harmony Heights site. And then we take totals of all this. So these are the project costs. These are the totals of all these other pieces, the CD side pieces, and then we're going to have a grand total for that project. This is the number that we're going to use when we request money from funding sources. I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. Yes, I am going to send out this particular template. You can use it, you can change it, you can make it yours, you can fix it if it's wrong. You can totally, yeah, it looks like $25 for contributed services. That's probably true. Okay, awesome. Thanks for the question. Appreciate that. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you this one that I created for the fire recovery stuff. This is that information from the individual project forms then goes into something like this if you're collating the information from a bunch of different projects, okay? And I'm just throwing this out there because we'll talk later about what happens at the end of all these projects. So we have several cooperators. We have landowner agreements. I actually just made a column for every single thing that happened so that I could keep track of everything that was finished. So LOA is landowner agreement. That means that landowner, that cooperator has signed their landowner agreement. The fence was inspected. This is completed. So these were things that were already done. FSA, we had some, in this case, we had some folks that had to do some signing up with NRCS for particular parts of practices. And so they had to make sure that they cleared the FSA process. We got a tax form, which they've kind of got done away with now, but a SAM report, a background check. Cultural resources was done. I can't remember what WCC was. I don't know. But that we did have some volunteer crews that were helping out with labor. I put some contact information into this spreadsheet for the folks so that when I was calling people about a certain thing, I could call the whole list at once and not have to go back and forth into other records to try to find their phone numbers. The cost of the project, what type of fence and how long, and then a total for the entire like group of projects, if that makes sense. Okay. Some of these other things I put a section in for notes. Oftentimes I'll put a column for a date that something happened so that I can just look at the master spreadsheet and say, yes, this is what happened on this date. I talked with this person on this day and this is what they said. And so I'll put those in their individual cooperator notes as well. But here I have sort of a master list of all of those things that are going on. When you have bigger projects with many, many people involved, it's handy to have the relevant data that you might need to look up really quickly in a simple spreadsheet like this. Now let's talk a little bit about timelines. And I like to do a timeline like this. I think you can do it in lots of different ways, but these Gantt charts, I'm a super visual person, so I like a Gantt chart, a good Gantt chart, just because it helps me see things better. So in this is very simple, not very broken down timeline, but say we do our conservation plan, we complete the conservation plan in January, that's a good time to do paperwork, right? We get our authorizations in February, we send out our authorization to proceed in February, then we do some stuff about permitting. We'll talk about all these in a minute. We get our cultural resources done in March. Hopefully the ground's not frozen by then. We install the well pump in March. We test the pump in March. We dig trenches in April for pipe. We lay pipe. We do all our connections on our water system. We install our fence in May. We finalize we do inspections in May. We finalize our contract in June, and we report and do reimbursements in June. So that's just an example of kind of stepping through that process, putting it into a format that you can see, but then other people can see it as well. It's actually a really good idea to talk with your cooperators about these timelines so that they work for them and their vendors and contractors. So if they're hiring somebody else to do this stuff, being really clear about what's supposed to happen when, this could be a really nice tool for your cooperator to share with the vendors and say, hey, we've got this and this and this that need to happen before you come, and then this and this and this that have to happen after, and we've got this deadline and this deadline. That helps the vendors actually to know how much leeway they have about, stalling something or changing, going over to somebody else's house and working there first. Which happens a lot. So we had talked at this point about monitoring. A monitoring plan should be part of your cost share agreement. So you need to kind of think through, how are you going to pay attention to what's going on with this project after it's complete? Usually this is a yearly check-in with the cooperator. I know that it's supposed to be a visit. Oftentimes we don't have time or funds to actually do them as a visit, but the cooperator could call in and send a photo. There's other ways to do monitoring. Sometimes if it's a bigger project or there's some wildlife aspects or something, or water quality aspects or something to it, there might be more involved monitoring. So you want to just make sure that you have that all figured out before you move on with the implementation. You want to make sure that those monitoring pieces are in place. One of the really good things to do is to take before and after photos. And if you haven't taken the before photos, the after photos are kind of useless. So good to think about this at this stage of the process. And what kind of monitoring you plan to do, there's a lot of logic involved in that, like what are we trying to keep track of, but also your funding source and your partners may have specific needs as far as monitoring goes. So you might want to check with them about that. So we're going to find and apply some funding. The easiest way to do this actually is if you have some previous projects that you've done and you've used particular funding sources for those kinds of projects before, then usually they fit really nicely. So using a template kind of what kind of funding has happened in the past is good. You can ask your other planners. You can look at the previous like 6-part folders or digital files, recording all the funding that's been used in similar kinds of projects. If you've got something that's kind of new and different, you may have to get a little creative and you may have to actually like look for new funding sources. And I talk about this a lot in the class that we did earlier on grants, on writing grants. But I'll tell you a little story. I don't have a whole lot of time for stories today, but I will tell you a little story. We had a very unusual project we were working on after the fires in 2014. We had a couple of small irrigation dams break. There were like 3 dams down this canyon, and they all blew out in rains right after the fires. The water runs off better, and so there was way more water going down through this water system, this creek system, than had gone down before, and it blew out all these irrigation dams. Well, there were only about 9 cooperators who were impacted by this. We had a lot of people downstream from there that were residents along that creek. So it was kind of a complicated thing. We kept trying to find funding sources for it. We had a ton of interest from I had people calling me from Washington, D.C. saying, we want to help, we want to help. And then I'd say, well, it's impacting 9 hay producers. It's going to like save, I don't know, the numbers were not very big as far as, how much of their livelihood was impacted by this. So all of the people from Washington, D.C. said, well, that's too small for us. We can't fund that because it's too tiny. And it was the weirdest problem to have, actually. So what we did was we knew that the cooperators were going to be having a lot of income problems. They weren't having their regular hay crops going out. They also had fire recovery and other ways to deal with. So they had homes to try to repair and stuff like this happening in the neighborhood. And so it was really cool. We had a particular local funder, an organization, a nonprofit organization that said, hey, how about we do this? We will make a contract with each of these people that are in this valley. And when they sell their property, then the money that we're loaning them towards this project as their portion of this project will be funded by the sale of the property. Well, that's not something we normally deal with. So it took us a little time to kind of figure out what the details of that would be. But it worked beautifully and we got the stuff done. And so sometimes it takes some pretty creative thinking to find some funding for some of these more unusual projects. So I'm going to call this slide applying potential funding. This means not applying for it, but applying it to your project. So what kinds of funding are available? What might we actually, put together in order to get this project funded? We want to consider the cooperator skills, their existing materials they have on hand that we might be able to use, and any other resources they have, equipment or, I don't know, tools, something like that. You want to think about how much you need. So you need your budget, and then you need to start pulling those line items out and figuring out who's going to pay for what, right? Who has the resources, and then what is left? What can't we fund in other ways, right? And then we'll look at our funding sources and see what matches up as far as getting those items done. We're going to also look at their cost share allowed percentages. Each of those funding sources usually says we'll pay for part of the project, but you'll have to have match. So we need to kind of manage those different allowed percentages. We're going to also be looking at our in-house ranking results. We'll talk about this more in a minute. But you usually do some kind of in-house ranking. This project is going to be a higher priority than this project. Those results will kind of tie into where you're going to get your funding from. Sometimes you have enough to fund a couple of certain kind of project, and so you need those ranking results to figure out which projects are going to fit, and then there's a certain amount left for the next project down, right? So we're going to think about the total available funds, and then other potential projects, like I just said, how much is there, and whether other projects are going to eat some of that up or not. And when you're applying potential funding, you want to be talking with your senior staff and directors and other planners on how that's worked before. Again, the pathway forward is usually the pathway that you've already done at some point in the past. So you want to kind of think about, they may have funding sources you don't know about. They may have, sorry, I got to plug my computer in apparently. There we go. Apparently I'm going to die if I don't. And then you definitely in this stage also want to be maintaining close contacts with your cooperator, because your cooperator is also going to need to comply with the rules of all these different funding sources. So you want to be communicating with them, figuring out between the two of you which pieces are going to work for what. So at our in-house ranking processes, these are going to be different CD to CD. They're kind of similar. I feel like the process itself is kind of similar, but the priorities are going to be kind of different for each CD. So you want to take a look at the current ranking tools that your CD uses and know, so that you can know what info to prepare for the ranking process. So you're going to put this project before your some in-house folks. So maybe your directors, maybe other senior planners are going to review it. You want to know what you need to get ready to present this to them. So go look at your current ranking tools, put a couple through, like take a couple of your current projects that you're working on and pretend that you're doing the ranking and see exactly where you would put that thing and how the results come out at the end, and then compare your results and see, oh, that makes sense that this would be a higher priority because it's got more water quality impacts, positive water quality impacts. It'll be a higher priority. Whatever the ranking criteria are is what you're gonna be looking at, okay? And then in this process, all the process of doing funding, you want to imagine that you're the funder and that you're personally putting up the cash so that maybe you don't have that much cash. So it's kind of a theoretical kind of exercise, but imagine that you're the funder. What questions would you ask? If your dollars are going to be going into this thing, is it worth your dollars? Are there certain pieces of it that you're kind of unsure about? You're not going to put money into it if you're not sure about it. So you definitely want to be imagining that you're the funder and kind of trying to anticipate some of the objections to it or prioritization changes or something like that. So what would you like to know if you were the boss? Okay, so when you actually go to apply for funding, we're applying potential funding, now we're applying for funding. Each funder has their own application process. I go over this a lot in the grants class. Please follow the instructions carefully. If there's nothing else that you learn about grants, is follow the instructions carefully and watch your timelines. Give yourself enough time to write that write the applications, to fill out the applications. Oftentimes these applications use technological terms or terms that that department knows really well, but you might not know the definition of it. Give yourself some time to make sure that you understand the application process. Okay, so now we're going to prepare contracts. We also did another class on this, so we called it Agreements in Action. This is a contracts section, and I'll go into way more detail in Agreements in Action about this stuff. So if you're interested and you haven't seen that yet, go take a look at that one. We're generally going to be using the CPDS system to enter all projects, no matter what the funding source is. And you're going to be putting the funding sources in there. But it also serves as a way to apply for a Conservation Commission funding. So you want to be using the CPDS system. I know that it's kind of a beast. It's gotten a little bit better, I feel like, over the last 15 years. We did at one point put a project into CPDS with $1 million to scuttle CPDS, but they haven't done that yet. They haven't approved that $1 million. So they have tried to improve it somewhat since then, though. So I think our point was taken. You're going to enter your project data. You kind of have to have a good chunk of your project data ready to put into CPDS. You can't just like go in and start something and not have a bunch of the info from your project. So make sure that you've got some good plans in place first before you go to put it into CPDS. And then it's going to actually generate a contract. So then you can print it, you can save it, you can edit it, you can do all kinds of things with it. You can print out a copy of it and take it to your cooperator, and you're going to carefully review with your cooperator that contract. And as we talked about in the other class, they're going to be legally required to comply with the contract terms. And so you want to make sure that they really understand all the details. And I suggested in that class that you actually give them a copy of it first and give them some time without you sitting there to review it. And then come together with them and make sure that they understand all the details. Go over it with them line by line. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about board decision packets. I don't know if this is true in other CDs. We do what's called a BDP, which is we used to just put the plan out and the board would look at it and they could look through the entire plan, like the paper 6-part folder. Nowadays, they ask that we do a kind of a summary of that plan so that they don't have to schlep all the, we're a lot bigger now, we do a lot more projects. So now they have like a 1-sheet BDP, a board decision packet, and it will have the maps, it will have the relevant information, a summary of the project. So again, when you write all this stuff up, this will all be ready to put in here with the relevant details and the justifications for what you're doing. And many people are kind of nervous at a board meeting to present a project. I would just recommend that you kind of think of this as an opportunity to get more people to look at the project and see if there's anything weird. It's not a reflection on you that you are a bad person or anything if they ask you questions that you can't answer, because this will often happen, ask you some questions about it that you haven't thought of before. That's actually a really good thing. If the goal for you is to get this project as clean and cool and awesome and effective as possible, then you really want more other people to take a look at it and say, oh wait, there's this thing that we haven't thought of yet. Let's consider that. So any comments and questions you want to add into your other material, so say you have a summary and the board says, hey, I don't know about this piece, this might be clarified, go back and clarify it in your documents so that your written kind of templates, so that you can then put them into your grant applications, for example. Then the board is going to approve and sign the project plans. The plan itself is sometimes authorized separately, and then the project itself, like the implementation of the project, is sometimes approved separately. So when both of those pieces are done, they might be together, but they might be separate. Then you're gonna be given authorization to proceed, and there's a particular form that gets sent out on the authorization to proceed. And you'll prepare that and send it to your cooperator, and that will give the date that you can start. So until this time, the timelines are a little bit fuzzy because you don't know exactly when these things will happen. But when this authorization to proceed letter comes out, then they know when they can start, and they should not start work before that date that's in the authorization to proceed letter. If they start before that, they won't get reimbursed for any of the costs that they've incurred up to that point, and that will throw all your budgets off, and it will make them pay for a whole lot more of the project. So definitely encourage them not to do anything on the project until they receive that letter and they start on the date that the letter specifies. Okay, at this point now we've got a plan, we've got a project, we've got kind of a detailed way of getting that project done. Now we're going to take a look at it from the perspective of any permits and compliance stuff that needs to happen around that. I'm giving you some examples here, but what's going to happen really is you're going to go to your senior planners or someone else that's worked on these projects before and find out what projects approvals and permits and compliance things you're going to need to do. Okay, so for example, WDFW, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, has what's called the HPA, the Hydraulic Project Approval. And this is a application basically that you fill out and you submit to DFW, and they will send back a summary. And whether you can or can't is in there. Any adjustments that they feel like you need to make to that project are in there. So you want to, again, don't think about this as you pass or fail. We get this caught up in this because we go to school. Forget school for now. Basically what we're doing is everybody's wanting this project to succeed in every different department that it can succeed in. So you want that hydraulic project approval to come back, and you want to take notes of everything that's in there, and you want to incorporate those suggestions and comply with those requirements so that the cooperator doesn't get in trouble later, so that you don't get in trouble later, so that it's all above board, everything's legal, everything's good. Okay. So another example, DNR has applications for timber harvest, for bridge and road construction, for probably a bunch of other stuff. There's the archaeologists and the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. They set the rules for our local archaeologists, and we have some on staff in the CDs, so go check out your archaeologists. For cultural resources review, cultural resources is usually only required for ground disturbing activities. So anytime you dig a hole, anytime you do that kind of stuff, sometimes there's some exemptions, but you want to throw any project that has ground disturbing activities in front of your archaeologists and get their opinion on it. Now there's a super great, and I know because I know the archaeologist who did this webinar, but there was a webinar last fall by Kim Lancaster, who's one of the CD archaeologists, and she did a whole webinar on cultural resources and compliance with the rules there. So I highly recommend you go look at that one. Just go back to CTD and look through all their stuff, because there's a lot of cool classes in there that can help you expand your understanding of how to do some of these detail pieces. Now, if you've got construction or you're building a bridge or something, or you're working in a wetland area or something, you might need to go to the county planning department. Those are some things that they may have some rules or some applications or some permits or something that you might need for those kinds of projects. And then actually, I know this isn't a one-off, but I did it. I have a small sheep farm, and I put in an animal carcass composting facility. Because mine was so small, I didn't have to get it cleared through the county health department, but we tried to do a bigger one with a pig farmer nearby, and they gave us all kinds of heck and actually shut down that whole project because they didn't approve of the way that we were doing that. They were following a bunch of rules that were for high rainfall areas, and we're not a high rainfall area, and so they weren't applying it properly. But our county health department is weird. But you should go check with them anyway, and they may say no. But but if they say no, wait long enough. Someday those folks will not be in that position anymore, and you may be able to get it passed. So we have another question. Oh, Jan is just saying here's some cultural, here's the link to the cultural resources. Great, great, Jen. That's awesome. Like I say, go to CTD, look at the website, find all the webinars. They're awesome. There are a lot more permits that we could talk about. I'm not that familiar with them, so go to your senior planners and go find out what permitting and compliance stuff needs to be done on projects like the one that you're working with, and that will be your best bet. I actually also would sometimes do like a Google search and say Washington state requirements for putting in X and put the practice name. And then if there was some, that just to double check and make sure that we're not missing anything. So then at this point, you're going to start working with your vendors and your contractors and your partners. And primarily your cooperators are going to be doing this, but you're going to be working with them as well. And oftentimes your cooperators, especially if they're new, especially if they're non-ag, they generally don't really know how to deal with vendors and contractors and partners. So you might have to help them a lot. So it's good to know what to do with them. Okay. So, the cooperators are going to, cooperators are going to choose their vendors, usually, okay? Now, there's two different processes here. There's a project that's led by the cooperator, and there's a project that's led by the district. And those are kind of more broad and usually have multiple cooperators in them. Sometimes the district is the one that's managing this vendor contractor, getting the implementation done kind of stuff. But most of the time we're working with an individual cooperator or a land owning entity, and they're doing this kind of work. They're choosing the vendors. And then there's different levels of cost on these and different levels of risk. So we're going to talk a little bit about when the cooperator's choosing the vendors, how they're going to do that based on how expensive the project is. So this is if we have a single cooperator, we're working with them, and they are choosing vendors, and the project is not big and risky, okay? We can give some assistance with vendor identification. Oftentimes, I've been asked by a cooperator, I don't know who, digs trenches. And I will go do some research and find out who the local people are who are digging trenches, and then they can go and contact those vendors. You want to make sure that it's a fair selection process. So I always recommend, and I think it's actually in our bylaws, that in our policies and procedures in our CD, that there be several estimates gotten for any particular item on the list. Okay, you want to make sure that you're not just taking the first one, that you're getting a good idea of what the range of prices might be, and that you're not favoring certain people over somebody else for anything other than the quality of their work. Okay, so you want to be kind of being careful about, if you think about it, this is not our money. This is the money of thousands of taxpayers, and they are paying into the system, and we're choosing how that money is being used. So if we think about it that way, then we can be a lot more careful about how we're spending state money, or whatever funding source we have. That money is being donated or being given in taxes by other people. So we want to feel kind of responsible to them for how that money is being used. So we want reasonable costs. We don't necessarily want to take the cheapest one if that one is going to be way low quality. We want it to be like you're going to the grocery store and buying something. You want good quality for a good price, right? So we're going to look at our vendors the same way, and our contractors too. Are they charging a reasonable price? What is included in what they're offering us? And and is it fair? Is it a fair decision to be made? Now we want our vendors to understand the timeline, and that timeline be agreeable to the vendor. Oftentimes they have things scheduled out for several months, or a year. And so we have to make sure that our timelines for the project and for the funding match up with the timelines that are possible for the vendors. So make sure that you're communicating that to your cooperator and to the vendors as well. You want to review any contracts carefully. And at this time, I'm not talking about a cooperator contract. I'm talking about a contract with a contractor. So maybe you have somebody coming. We had some folks come and do tree removal after fire. Like we had some of the slash and big trees taken out in some sites. And we had a contract with that particular vendor. And we want to review those kinds of contracts very carefully as well, especially if they're big, especially if they have a lot of money involved. We want to be very, very clear on who's doing what and why they're doing it and how much it's going to cost and what pieces are part of that contract. And then this is difficult because oftentimes vendors just think about doing the job and they're not really thinking about talking to you about it. And oftentimes, sometimes these vendors too, they're not just talkative people in general. They like to go do the job and get it done, which is great. We're good with that. But we also want to be very careful about any changes that might need to be made, about any problems that they might run into that we have to adjust around. We want to know if there are time delays or something happening on that side and any cost overruns. So we definitely want to try to keep our vendors in the loop. We want to be, if they're not calling us, we're calling them. And I have a general tip for that. Sometimes when you're trying to talk to somebody and they don't call back, they're ignoring you, that you've asked them a question and they don't get back with you. There is a method that my grandmother taught me, which is basically call them every half hour. And when they answer the phone, don't be mad. Just say, hey, I was just calling to check in, or hey, just wondered about this question. If you call them every half hour and they have to go through all the messages, that is taking more time and more effort on their part and more mental effort than actually answering your questions. So you can stack the decks in your favor of getting people to talk back to you if you just call them every half hour. Maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe you call them, every day for 4 days. But it is definitely that patient persistence, patient and polite persistence that will get people talking to you on the phone. And that can be used with anything that we're talking about, not just vendors. So there's a couple of pieces here on these bigger projects that may be district-led. There are some rules and guidelines and things for those that ensure that things are fair. So bidding on a project is a really more formal process for choosing a vendor. These are usually big, costly things with a lot of risk involved with them. You can also use bids for things like lawyers or architects or river restoration design companies, things like that. Basically, what you're doing is you're setting up a very set process for choosing a particular vendor. And the best place to go for that, and I have a link in the class outline for this, is the MRSC Small Works roster. They have a little instruction book that I have included a link to in your materials. MRSC, I can't even remember what that stands for. They're a statewide organization that sets these kind of bidding rules and also keeps what's called the Small Works roster. So small works, not meaning tiny like most of what we're working with, but not humongous government funded highway projects and things like that. Okay, so it's just this kind of stuff that we're working in falls into that small works kind of definition. And that small works roster is a place where contractors can actually put their information in. And when you go into the MRSC website and you look at the small works roster, you can get initial contact lists for all these different vendors who specialize in different things. So maybe you're looking for a river restoration design person. I don't know where to go to look for those. So I'm going to go look at the small works roster and type in the kind of contractor that I'm looking for, and all of those have registered through MRSC, and so they have to meet certain criteria to be registered on that list. And then follow the bid process exactly. This means to the point of, I will open this envelope at 12 o'clock noon on this particular day, and it better not be 12:01. Okay, just the bidding process has to be on those big projects so clear and so fair that no one can come back and say, hey, they got that job and I didn't get it, and now I'm going to sue you because I didn't get that job. Okay, so bidding, be meticulous about your details about putting things out for bid. Bonding and insurance, any larger contractors that you're using should be bonded. A bond is a way for contractors to prove that they have a financial, enough financial chutzpah to actually do the project. These are for big projects, but I would look at bonding and insurance on any construction type of project. Basically, a bond is a piece of paper that says they've got this much in an account somewhere that could cover if something goes wrong. Okay. And then insurance is, as all insurance, is a way to manage the risk of something going wrong. So if they've got insurance and it applies to a particular situation, then they can do something. It just covers everybody, covers the contractor, covers the cooperator, covers all the people involved if there is insurance involved with that project. That's probably an oversimplification, but we don't have time for more. Yeah, you guys know something about insurance, I'm sure, because you bought some for your car. So implementation, now we get to actually do something. Hooray! I love this part. This is the part where fireworks should go off because we've done all this paperwork. We've done the plan. We've done all the prep. Yeah, exactly. Yay! Celebrate. We get to do something now on the ground, which is what we were all trying to do, right? This is the goal of the whole thing. And we don't get to do hardly anything during the implementation. So, but what we do need to do, because the cooperator is going to be doing almost everything that has to be done, they're going to be doing it. But that sense of excitement will help you keep in close contact with your cooperator and enjoy the process with them. Any partners that are involved, we want to make sure that things are being coordinated, that the timelines are working, that people who are coming in and doing something are doing it in the right order. We want to be keeping in close contact with everybody. And we're going to visit the site as frequently as possible to check on progress. Now, some projects you may only need to visit once as things are going on. Other projects are more complicated. That dam project I was talking about, I think I did 4 or 5 different visits to that site as things were going, because there was a lot of earth moving going on. There were big equipment. It was a riparian area. There was a lot of different pieces of that. So I went quite a bit. I think it took 3 or 4 months to finish that project. And I think I went 4 or 5 times over to that site to visit and check and see that things are going well. I just want you to be ready, because what will happen is things will be delayed. There will be things that change from your plan. If you are a perfectionist and you want your plan to be exact, it may be a problem, because you got to have a little bit of grace about projects. Things can go wrong and things can be unexpected, and someone will delay something sometime along there. Their cooperator may not understand that they can't use this particular material, they have to use something else. So there's going to be changes and there's going to be stuff happening. So you're still going to be involved. You're still going to be kind of trying to shepherd this project through. And the more patience you can have with those delays and changes, the better. You want to notify your funding sources and any partners of any major issues as soon as possible. So if there is a cost overrun, if that goes beyond what the budget looks like, if there is a change to the line of, the edge of something, you want to be talking with your funding sources and your partners of anything like that as soon as possible. They may have changes, they may have to adjust on their end. They may not be able to adjust on their end. You need to know that as soon as possible. You need to know if you've got multiple funding sources for a project. You may want to, if you can, shift some items from one to another somewhere along the way. Funding may be impacted by these big changes, and you may have to get permissions and authorizations to do them. So just be sure that you're keeping track and noting any changes. So we're talking now about inspections. And this was the part when I first became a conservation planner that I was a little bit scared about, because I didn't know very much about what I was trying to be looking at. And I was signing my name that it was right when I didn't know very much about it. So there's two questions we want to ask when we're doing inspections. There's two different kinds of inspection, really, and what you're certifying is that both are true. Was the practice installed correctly, and is it functioning properly, is the first one. So you're doing an inspection on the implementation of the item, okay, of the practice. Our second question is the practice achieving the actual goal? So you put this thing in, is it addressing the resource concern? So both on the implementation and on the effect on the resource, we want to be looking at both of those. And sometimes this is something, the second question is something we can't answer right away, because it's going to take some time for, say, that riparian area to repair itself, or those plants to grow big enough to make a difference. But we want to be thinking about those two questions whenever we do an inspection. So here's my top tips for inspections. Enlist help, at least for the first couple or few of the inspections that you do. It would really be helpful. Sometimes you can't, but be really helpful if you had somebody with you that knew that practice well. And that way they can kind of give you a guideline of what to, things to point out, things to look for, things where things might fail easily, or something might not be installed correctly, and that might happen a lot. So getting help would be really helpful. Again, being really familiar with your conservation practices and the practice standards, that's going to be really helpful when you go to inspect, because you're going to want them to comply with those specifications. Now, you want to maybe go and look at some previous similar projects and see what it looks like completed and working, right? So maybe you want to go take a little tour and see some other similar projects that are finished, and maybe some that were a couple years ago, so that you can see what it might look like later. You're going to follow any practices certification processes in your district. We're actually trying to develop this, like who is allowed to certify practices as being complete and correct. If some person has a certain level of training and then they can go do certification, those are things that are going to be very specific to your district. So find those and follow them. And then definitely any practice that requires engineering, go get engineering. Don't try to wing it. Even practices that you think might not need some extra support, you might throw, for example, we have the really cool, what are those meetings called, Jan? My brain has gone blank. There's the forums that you can throw your projects in front of an engineering forum and get some feedback on it and see if it needs engineering. Get that engineering and design support when you need it, because you're going to be held accountable for the success or failure of that project one way or another. And you may not, we talked before about contracts and such, and the fact that you might actually get sued, but not to that level even. But if it just fails, that's not a good thing either. So we want to definitely get somebody else to take the responsibility for engineering and design when it's needed. And then you're going to sign off on the cost share agreement in the inspection section, which is right at the very end of that document. You're going to have some lines that you can sign that and it's interesting in the CPDS version that the places where the planner signs in that case, usually we're off to the right. The cooperator signs to the left and the planner signs to the right. In that particular section, the planner signs on the left. So make sure that you're signing on the correct line. That's happened a few times. So you can be held accountable if they fail. so, so just be careful, and hopefully they won't fail. So then at the very end, and I've never heard anybody else talk about this, but I'm going to talk a little bit about wrapping up at the end of your project. So all the implementation is done. You've gone and certified it. It's looking great. Everything's cool. The cooperator's happy. Stuff is working. Then what? Then what do you do? So I would actually do a little section of time where I'm focusing on the records that I'm leaving about this project. You may be asked some detailed questions later, and you might want to go back and look, and you've done 50 projects since then, you don't remember. So you definitely want to be updating your P&I notes, and I would recommend that you do that as they happen, as those things happen. But if you, for some reason, got real busy and forgot to put something in, go fix it, go finish it. I would write a summary of the results. So at the beginning, you're writing sort of that justification. I would write a summary of what actually happened, okay, and how it actually went and whether it succeeded or not. Again, we took some before photos. Now we're going to take some after photos and compare the two. Maybe you want to set up monitoring points for these so that you take them from the same place at the same angle. You might do, I'm a visual person, so I might do some as-built drawings. If things changed along the way, what did it change to? So you've got your kind of plan, your maps and things for the actual project as you were planning it, and then maybe the pipeline had to go in a different direction. There was a big rock in the way or something, and the pipeline had to go in a slightly different direction. I would also do a map of what actually happened on the ground. And then if things changed in the financial side, which hopefully didn't because that's a big headache and a nightmare, but if they did, then you want to be like making sure that you're documenting any changes that happened on the financial side. Recording any substantial changes of any kind and describing how they were resolved, because oftentimes people will focus on the thing that happened and not remember the things that happened to fix it. And so that's actually your learning process is coming from that. How did you resolve the problem? Maybe you can use that again later. So you definitely want to write these things down and see what happened. Just lately, we've gone through a big project, a $100,000 project that I did 10 years ago. And we went back and looked at the file because I was remembering some things, but I don't remember the stuff that happened 10 years ago, and it was a little bit different than I remembered. So you might want to, if you have paper 6-part folders, making sure that the sections are correct, that you've got the right papers in the right locations. You might go back into your digital files and make sure that the right maps are there and the right documentation is in your digital files. And you may have to go back and look, or another planner might have to go back and look. And so make your life easy for yourself by putting it together and neatening it up at the end. And then reports. This is a little tricky because every funding source sort of does it differently. They oftentimes, well, we know that they're doing a financial report through your financial team every month. Anytime there's money going in and out, they're going to be doing some financial stuff. But oftentimes the funding sources will also like periodic progress reports, narrative progress reports, and then a report at the end of what happened with pictures or whatever. Now, all of these are going to have a different format. So you're going to just talk to your funding source and ask them what they want. Usually it's in the contract somewhere that you have with that funding source. Make sure that your descriptions are clear and concise. Don't say more than you need to, but say enough, and make sure that it's understandable what you're saying. And then you're going to report any substantial changes. Hopefully you're doing that as you go along, but maybe you have to like do a little summary of that at the end. and then their resolution. And then you're gonna, if you're using CPDS for these particular projects, which you probably should be, you're gonna go in and update CPDS. And we'll talk about this in a minute. There's another way that these results come out of CPDS in the big picture. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So for the financial follow-up, I probably should have done a little bit more on this, but basically you're going to be working with your financial team very closely and your cooperator really closely. Oftentimes the cooperators don't know what forms to fill out. They don't know about the contributed services form. They don't know how to record their materials that they're contributing. They don't know what kinds of receipts or how detailed the receipts must be. So this is actually kind of a big job, is helping this cooperator to keep up with turning in all these forms and required pieces of paper. So that's a big job, and be ready to have that. You're going to prepare any needed forms for the financial team, making sure that things are where they should be and all the boxes are checked and all the a lot of this has to, we talk about this more in one of the other classes. I can't remember which one, but we talked more about it. I'm sure we talked about it in the basic planner training class, as far as what the forms are and following up with the financial side. Do double check all your calculations. I was so proud. I have no number memory. So when I first went to work for the conservation district, they plunked a bunch of plans down on my desk and they said, here, you're taking these over from the previous person. And I opened up the first one and I looked at the estimates of my budget, the budget that they had prepared. And some of the numbers were off. They had just miscalculated. And I was so proud because I found the miscalculations. And I'm not someone who is normally a person who does that. But I was trying to be careful and learn. And so I was going through and I went, oh, well, that looks weird. And I went and calculated it again and it wasn't correct. And so double check all your calculations, especially when you're preparing your budgets, but definitely at the end, you want to make sure that all of your paperwork is in order. And then the cooperator will be reimbursed by the financial team. They'll get a check, but they are often kind of nervous about the timelines. Like, when is that check going to come in? They have usually forked out a whole bunch of money for this project, and they are out that money until the reimbursements come in. So they definitely want to be well informed about the timelines. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what happens after all of that has gone on. Then later, we're asked to collect some larger scale info. And this is where your program summaries and your larger picture summaries come in. You might be having this individual project as part of a group of projects that are similar. You're going to put all these projects into CPDS, and then the Conservation Commission will pull data from that and say, there were this many projects of this type done, and this many acres of something was improved. Those kinds of data can only come if we are putting in the data correctly in the first place. So we just want to be able to track those bigger reporting, which is why I gave you sort of that program level spreadsheet to track bigger groups of projects, so that when you are asked a question like that 6 months down the road, you have a nice summary of all of that, easy to find in a hurry. So I'm always thinking, how am I going to organize this in a way that I can find it or someone else could find it easily and in a hurry? If someone does a public records request, this is a big deal. How much time is it going to take you to go pull your data, right? They're definitely going to, maybe you make a larger map with location dots for 15 projects that you did in a particular area. So these are kind of the bigger picture reporting things that you might be asked to do. You might be asked to go find a bunch of photos for an outreach event or something, and you're doing a brochure or a flyer, and you want a particular kind of photo. We have a very sophisticated photo organization system so that we can then find, if we need a picture of the district manager, where are all the pictures of the district manager? Where are all the pictures of riparian projects? Where are all the pictures of forest trees or something else. Very handy to have some good high-level photo organization, and definitely tagging your photos and doing a little work at the end to kind of organize your photos will make this process so much easier. You should just do it, because I know it takes a lot of time and it doesn't seem like an important thing, but when you go back later and you try to find these things and you're spending hours looking for them, you're going to appreciate it. Okay. Now, as I was telling Jan earlier, I failed to make a final slide with all my info on it, but I'm going to add that to our little presentation here. And so that will be coming when you get the email after this class is over in a day or two. Jan will send you an email that has this recording. It will have the slides, and it will have the outline, and it will have a lot of supplemental materials. I'm going to actually give you like a sample HPA form. There's some different pieces in there that will help you as you're putting these post-planning kinds of documents together, and that will be coming up. But if you'd like to contact me about any of this, my email address is Terry, Terri, at OkanaganCD.org. I may not be working for the Conservation District after June 30th, depending on funding. So if you'd like to contact me after that, my email address is terri@totalplantgeek.com. Are there any other questions? Is there anything that I can share with you that you've been wondering about? Thank you, Jan, for posting the email addresses. I will put them on the last slide that I haven't created yet. Anyone else? Anyone got any questions? It's been great to be here with you. I love working with new planners because it's such important work, and I love you guys, and you guys are all out there doing the great stuff, and if I can help you in any way, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank
Look
you
like
so
question.
much, Terry. This has been a really great series. I really appreciate your time on these and all of the, like you said, supplemental materials. So on the CTD website, we've got all of the previous ones posted, and you can find the different YouTube links as well as Google folders with all of the stuff that Terry's provided for each of these trainings. And I will get this one up here either today or tomorrow as well. So the whole set will be there. You'll be able to find them in the training library section after today. So, and I'll email it to everyone that registered. So thank you again, Terry. And yeah, thank you all for being here today, and hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, guys.